Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for coming to our talk. So I'm Guillaume Laforge. I'm a developer advocate for Google Cloud Platform.
And I'm Brad Abrams. I'm a product manager on the Google Assistant team. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to extend the Assistant with actions on Google. So when Sundar announced the Assistant at I/O last year, it was for one purpose, and that was to build a conversational interface to Google. So when we think about so we want that conversational interface to be available everywhere that users are. So we want that conversational interface to be there in your messaging application. So when you're talking to your friends about where to go out to eat, the Google Assistant is there to help you pick a restaurant. We want it to be available in your pocket when you're trying to figure out how to get there, full access to everything you can do on your phone. And of course, we want the Google Assistant to be there in your home when you're kicking back, listening to some jazz, or if you need to read a recipe or set a timer, we want the Assistant to be there too. And of course, this is just the beginning. We actually want the Assistant to be available in all kinds of devices, whether that's dishwashers or tractors. So how do we think about the Assistant? The way we think about it is that it's a conversational interface. And it's a conversational interface between you and Google that helps you get things done in your world. And so the thing I'm really excited about with the Assistant is it builds on a decade or so of research and development that Google has done in a wide range of computer science topics. Certainly in search, but also natural language understanding, intent processing, speech recognition, text-to-speech, a whole host of these core advances that Google has made. But what's really interesting is the way we brought it together in a really magical experience. But that's not all. What's important to me as a developer is that we've also built on Google's history of platforms. If you think about it, Google Search was our first platform. It was a platform that connected publishers with readers. Then we have a platform with YouTube today that connects creatives with their viewers, and a platform with Play that connects application developers with their users. And so building on that rich history of platforms with Google, we have Actions on Google. And Actions on Google is the way you, as developers, can extend the Google Assistant. It allows you to connect with your users wherever the Google Assistant is. And it allows you to help users get things done with whatever service that you can offer. And it allows you to innovate, really, in a brand new space, a new paradigm with the way that users are interacting with computers. This gives you a nice framework, a way to experiment and innovate. And so we launched the platform late last year, and we couldn't be more happy with the actions that we've seen develop for it. There's hundreds of actions out there doing all kinds of really interesting things, and I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll be ready to build your own action for the Google Assistant. So let's talk about that action. So Guillaume and I were working on this, knowing this conference was coming up, and we thought it'd be great to help users find their way around the conference. So we built an action that helps users understand what sessions are going on in the conference and how to get things done. And so this is just our demo application. And so the way it works with the Assistant on Google Home that's where we've launched Actions on Google so far, is on Google Home, is users give some sort of query like, OK, Google, let me talk to Cloud Next 17. And then the Assistant will respond, sure, here's Cloud Next. And then you hear an earcon. Earcon is to the ear what an icon is to the eye. That's a signification, a demarcation that something is changing in this dialogue. And then our action actually kicks in and takes over the conversation and has a two-way dialogue with the user. And that happens in a different voice to further differentiate the experience from what's going on with the user. So there are 4 voices to choose from, and you can go and hear audio clips, 2 male and 2 female voices, so you can pick the one that best matches what you're trying to accomplish. Anyway, then there's a 2-way dialogue, and then when either party is ready to end that conversation, the conversation goes back to the assistant after the exit earcon is played. Okay, so that's the high-level framework. What we're going to do in this talk is we're going to build that action for you. We're going to walk through the entire process. From the beginning, we're going to talk about designing for this new modality, for this eyes-free modality. It's a very different experience than if you built a website or an application before. Then we're going to talk about the development of such an application, both in terms of the machine learning, natural language understanding aspect, as well as connecting to your backend systems and hosting of your business logic. Then we're going to talk about how to deploy that action, both in terms of the server deployments that need to happen, as well as how you help Google understand about that action with Actions on Google. Okay, so I'm going to jump in and talk about the design section. So first, we need to have a conversation about conversations. Will we ever be able to talk to machines the way we talk to people? You know, science fiction certainly says that we can, but let's be honest. Talking to computers is really difficult today. If you've ever been through one of the voice trees before, you know that talking to computers today really sucks. But that's only because human-to-human communication is only deceptively easy. It's nothing short of miraculous that 2 people can enter a conversation and leave it knowing something neither of them knew going in. So conversations are easy, right? Well, they are easy for the user. In fact, they're probably the easiest way that users have to interact. You don't have to guess what will happen when I push a button. I just use my natural language. But for us as developers and software professionals, it's hard. These rules are hard to codify. It's difficult to make a computer really understand what a user is saying. But it's only easy for us as humans because we've been doing it our whole lives. Conversations are governed by language, and language has rules, and language has syntax and context. And as humans, we've gotten amazingly good at understanding and dealing with context. But take heart, we don't have to get there, we don't have to get there overnight. Humans have been speaking in language for hundreds of thousands of years, and we've only just started to have computers trying to talk to humans. But this does mean, because humans have been speaking this way so long, it's probably better to teach computers to talk like humans rather than the other way around. So let's talk more concretely. How do we design an interface that helps humans talk to computers? Well, I'm going to offer a couple of tips for you. The first one is really to create a persona. The way you interact with your wife or husband is very different than the way you interact with your boss. That's different than the way you interact with a person selling tickets, because there's a different persona, different roles involved there. So it's no wonder that the first thing you need to do when you build your action for the Google Assistant is to think about what persona you're trying to create. So this is some rules that a process that we've laid down, and we've used it with many partners. It seems to work. First, we try to identify our core brand attributes. What is fundamental about our company or bot that we're trying to do? And so when Guillaume and I started working on this action, we thought, we wanted it to be knowledgeable, helpful, encouraging. That's kind of the experience we wanted out of it. And then next we try to tease out what are those design principles? What are the guide rails that puts on our development? One of the partners we work with told me this process really helped them trim features from their experience by deciding what the design principles are. So for us, we really wanted it to be data rich. We wanted it to consistently recommend and be proactive. And so actually Guillaume spent a bunch of time getting all the data we could about what sessions were available, when they were available, who was speaking, what rooms, so that we would be a very data-rich experience. Next, think about the actual dialogue writing. What is the voice? What's the style and persona that we want? And for us, we thought maybe a little geeky. I mean, this is still a Google conference, but eager and motivating as well. And finally, we recommend you create a style guide or a bio sketch that you can use to inform the writing of dialogue, a concrete artifact. And so here's a template of one. This is the one that we used. And notice it says kind of sample things that your action might say. What might your action say? What are things that you would just never say? They're outside of their persona. You shouldn't say that. And then what words should you use? You know, what are some substitute words? What you find, especially if you're doing this at scale, is you may have several people writing dialogue for your action. Maybe the person changes over time as happens in development processes. And having an artifact like this that really makes concrete who you're trying to be as your action can really help. That leads us to the next one, which is around writing dialogue. So here's an actual sample dialogue that we started writing. And then you can see the markup that we did as we went through and started applying some of the design principles that we have. And that just gives you a sense of how this process can go. So, and that is really my second tip, is really to go and invest the time to write some sample dialogue. And that can be as simple as opening up a Google Docs file and writing dialogue using the style guide as a way to help yourself do that. But there's a few samples we suggest you write. So first, write down the happy path. What's your dream path, the way people are supposed to go through your action, and make sure that's good, and you've thought through what the interactions with that are. Next, think about that first-time user experience. Somebody who's never used it before, what do you do to help them understand the interaction so that they know what you can do? You frame the problem for them so that they ask questions that you're more likely to be able to answer. Next is the opposite, which is think about the returning user. Once you've earned them back, how can you trim down the experience or taper the experience so that they can get to the functionality they want quicker? The next one is there are no errors in dialogue. There's never an error. There's just clarification of meaning, right? When we have a conversation, sometimes we misunderstand each other, and we repeat back, we clarify, we ask, did you mean? We get more information and context. Before we take some major action, maybe we confirm it. If it's not a major action, maybe we are confident enough to just do it. So thinking about some repair scenarios. And finally, you need to think about those personality questions. What we've seen from the Google Assistant generally is, especially when users are first starting to use your action, they probe it and they ask it some personality questions. Hi, how are you? Thank you. Good evening. Do you want to go on a date? Can I marry you? Those are questions you got to think about within your persona. What are appropriate answers?
Sorry, Brad, I don't want to marry you.
Yeah, you do. Okay, good. We'll talk. We'll talk. Okay. So that's a bit on design. Let's turn it over and talk about development.
Right. So I'm a developer advocate, so I'm also developing, obviously. So I'm happy to speak about development. So what's happening? We are users. We're talking to our Google Home device. The Google Home device is going to interact with the Google Assistant. We speak to the device, right? So there's speech, an utterance that's going to be transferred to the assistant. And we're going to do speech-to-text analysis to be able to think and react to what's being said, but with words which are easier, well, written words, let's say, which are easier to understand than voice. We do the natural language processing to extract things like the entities, all the parameters that make the conversation, as well as the intent of the user. The user wants to learn about a particular session, etc. And there's lots of intelligence in there, the ranking, picking up who the user actually is, etc., and as well as text-to-speech back when we go back to the user. So we ask to speak to our assistant. So sure, OK, here's Google Next 2017. And in the back, it's going to call API AI, which contains our assistant, the structure, all the intents, all the entities. Hi, welcome to Cloud Next 17. And then the conversation really starts. So I want to hear more about machine learning. So again, speech recognition, etc. going on, speech to text. And it's going to invoke API AI. And so there are some things which can be done automatically from within API AI, let's say canned responses and things like that. But sometimes you actually need to fetch some data from somewhere else. And that's where we're going to use the Google Cloud Platform, and in particular, Cloud Functions, which, as you discovered this morning, was announced as beta. And that's within Cloud Functions that I'm going to write the business logic of my action. And what's nice is that on the Next website, there's actually a REST API that I can invoke to get the list of speakers, the list of sessions, the list of topics, etc. So my function is going to invoke that REST API to find all the talks with the label machine learning, basically. And then, OK, the next machine learning session is blah, blah, blah. And then with text-to-speech, I get the response, the session I was interested in. And I let Brad, oh yeah, no, let me just say a few words about that one, and I'll let you do the demo afterwards. So API AI, what is it? So it's a cross-platform tool for building advanced conversational interfaces. We define intents, so the different kind of questions or interactions you can have with your assistant. But then those interactions also need sometimes some parameters. So one intent would be, OK, I'd like to learn about machine learning, like the example we had before. So the intent is learning about something. But that's something, that's our parameter here. So it's exactly like mapping utterance, what the user says, to actually a function call. The function name would be the intent that we try to call. And the parameters are the parameters, like the topic, machine learning, that we pass as a parameter to this intent. And I let this time.
All right, can we have demo 1? OK, so what you're seeing is the API to AI tool. And it's a tool that's freely available. Everybody can go use it. And it's available right now. So it is the tool that helps understand this huge vagaries of human language and turns it into intents with arguments. So here's the set of intents I have. We'll talk about it in a second. And then this is a little test experience here. So for example, we can say talk to Cloud Next 17. And that's an example user utterance. And then it gives us this same result we saw on the slides. But what's more interesting is it's actually taken that text and it said, that goes with this particular intent. And that, in this case, it's the default welcome intent. And you can see in this default welcome intent, we've given several user says expressions. We've given several examples of what a user might say that should come into this intent. And then in this case, we've given some static text that you should respond. So that looks pretty easy, like you could maybe do that with a if statement. But it also works, we do some basic machine learning, so you can add words like please, and it still gets it, or can I get Cloud Next 2017.
And it's not a French keyboard.
Yes, not even a French keyboard. So even if there's some optionality, and it learns over time, you can do some training on this, a more advanced topic. So that's pretty basic. Actually, an aside here is actually showing this to one of the cloud marketing guys, and the prompt is, what would you like to know? And they said, well, clearly the thing I want to know is, where can I get a cocktail? That's what marketing guys want to. There's nobody from cloud marketing here. Right? Okay, good. That's what they wanted to know is, where can I get a cocktail? And you can see we give an okay response here. It's basically the default help intent. That basically we didn't know what to match it to, so we matched it to the help intent. So that's kind of not a great answer. So let's actually see what it would be, since the marketing guys are paying for this, if we can help them find their cocktail. So let's call the intent find cocktail. And then what a user might say if they were looking for a cocktail, well, they might say, where are the cocktails? Can I get a drink?
Where's the booze?
Yeah, exactly. Are there any cocktails? So we recommend between 5 and 10 of these expressions to get started, to have enough, to have it make sense. Then I worked with marketing to get some approved language for this action, because this is the most important one, clearly. And now, when I give that same query, where can I get a cocktail, notice this time it matched to the find cocktails, right? And in fact, is there a cocktail, please? It still matches. So same kind of optionality, whatever gets done. And if you do some more training, it can get even better. So that's pretty simple. Let's look at something a little bit more complex in this find topics. So the way this one works is we've given several samples, but we've highlighted some things as entities or slots. We're saying anytime they say breakout sessions, whether they say big data or another topic, then it should match this intent. Or are there any talks, or I want to know about, or whatnot. You can see this actually matches to a topic. So, and the topic is actually an entity. So we flip over to this entity. You can see that we've actually pulled in a lot of data about what are all the entities, what are all the things that users might say. So for example, I believe we are now in the big data machine learning topic. And so we've said, look, other ways people might refer to that topic are these aliases. So now, for example, if we say, I need to learn about big data, then it will match that, hopefully. It'll match that to the find topic intent. That's great. And it actually matched the topic to big data and machine learning. So that's pretty cool, right? It actually matched it and extracted that entity. To make things more interesting, I mentioned in the UX section about context. So if I reset the context and I say talk to GCP next, and I say more here, it says, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about, because more doesn't make sense for that prompt. But if I ask about big data, then hopefully it matches to that intent, and it does. Then here I can say, I want to know more about that. And now, more actually has a meaning. We're within a context. So the way, I'm sure this is going to work in just a second. Yes, yes. Let me just try it one more time. Yeah, there it is. The way it works this time, it knew what it was, and it got the data. And notice the context is find by more next. And that's because we actually set up that this context, when it leaves this intent, it will set that context. And then the more next intent actually is guarded by. It requires this find by context next. Okay, so that's the basics there. One more time. Here's big data. And let's see what the JSON actually looks like. So you can see this is actually what API.ai is going to send to your webhook. So all API.ai does is take the natural language and turn it into a function with a method call. The function is this. It says the action is find by topic, and the parameter here is big data and machine learning. So it's taken this enormous variety of human language and turned it into this big data machine learning find by topic. So now Guillaume is going to take over and show you how to process that JSON.
Exactly. So let's go back to the slides. I'm going to say a few words about Cloud Function. So here, find by topics, it's actually going to call Cloud Function. The cocktails, it was already inside API.ai. Didn't have to get outside of API.ai. But here, we're going to use Cloud Functions for doing the function call, let's say. The thing is, here I'm speaking about Cloud Functions, but what you need is just somewhere to have an application deployed that's able to parse and produce JSON content, basically. So it doesn't have to be on Google Cloud Platform. It doesn't have to be Cloud Function. So you can use anything, anywhere, as long as it's a URL which is available on the internet. But why Cloud Functions? So it's been beta announced as beta this morning. It's our new serverless platform. It's event-based or event-oriented. There are 3 kind of events which are supported right now. Cloud storage update. So for example, imagine you have an image which is uploaded, and then you want to react to do thumbnails and resizing or applying some filters. If you're using Cloud PubSub, it's going to react to a new message which appears on some topic. But the one we're interested in, it's the HTTP trigger. So you can trigger a Cloud Function via a call, an HTTP call. In our case, that's a post request to our Cloud Function. So what's interesting with that Cloud Function, especially when you're writing something like an assistant, you're not necessarily a super wizard with tons of knowledge of how to deal with your servers and things like that. That's what's nice with a serverless approach, and with Cloud Functions being a fully managed service, you really don't have to care and worry about the ops side of things. Also, the other nice aspect of it is that there's automatic scaling happening. So even if your assistant is very successful, you won't have a problem with scaling because the scaling is done automatically. It's a fully managed service. And it's also cost-effective because it's not like long-running VMs or containers. It's built by basically the function call. I don't remember the billing details for a Cloud Function, but it's pretty cost-effective. If you don't get anyone using your agent, it won't cost you anything. And the last aspect, which is important as well, is that Cloud Functions, when you author Cloud Functions, you develop Cloud Functions, it's using JavaScript and Node.js. So, pretty much any developer these days know enough of JavaScript to be able to write Cloud Functions. So even if you're, a front-end developer, you're obviously using JavaScript at some point. So you don't have to be a back-end developer. But if you're a back-end developer using Node.js, well, fine. And also, as that was also the announcement of the GA of App Engine Flex, by the way. And there's Node.js support in App Engine Flex, so you could also use that. All right. So let's get back to our little architecture diagram. So we have the user asking the home device, contacting the assistant, then calling API.ai. Then for some of the intents, it's calling our Cloud Function, which calls the REST API exposed on the next websites. But before saying that, Cloud Function is really pretty nifty when you deploy a new version of a function. You're developing, OK, let's answer somewhat differently, or let's see if there's a special case in the dialogue that I need to handle, like an error, because the next REST API is not available, etc. So you are developing, and then you have to redeploy your function. Deploying a function is pretty fast. It takes 20 or 30 seconds. But when you're developing, you'd like to have somewhat of a tighter feedback loop and be able to develop more quickly without having to wait, let's say, 30 seconds every 5 minutes. So you code for 5 minutes, then you wait again 30 seconds while you deploy your changes. So it can be a little bit irritating. So I'm going to tell you about 2 interesting tools which allow you to be more productive and see your changes live. So the 2 tools I'm going to talk about are ngrok and the Cloud Functions emulator. The Cloud Functions emulator is a way to actually run Cloud Functions locally on your machine, on localhost, basically. So it's a Node module, it's open source, it's available on GitHub. You can use pretty much the same commands as when you use gcloud functions, deploy, etc. It's pretty much the same set of functions which are available, of commands which are available. But there are 2 nice aspects. Live reloading. So as soon as you make changes to your code, the changes are taken into account. So you don't have to redeploy anything. The changes are live right away. And the other thing that I will not cover in my demo, it's the fact that you can also debug in Chrome what you're doing, your code, the code of the body of your function, which can be pretty handy because it's not like putting println statements when you interact, or the println statements is like talking through the Google Home device, basically. And the other tool, so the emulator is working locally on your machine, so it's, as I said, on localhost. But API, when you say, OK, use my webhook pointing at my Cloud Function, it needs a URL which is accessible from the web. Well, localhost is usually not accessible from the web. Otherwise, your machine might perhaps be hacked or something. But there's this nifty little tool called ngrok, which is both a service and a command line tool, which creates a tunnel, a secure tunnel, over the internet to your machine. So let's see that in action. Please, let's move to the second laptop. All right. So we'll have a look at the find by topic intent. Or perhaps the simpler, no, let's look at this one. Find by topic. So we have all the possible utterances. And at the very bottom, there are 2 things which are interesting. Perhaps I could also mention that the action, that's how we will refer to this current intent in our code later on. But the 2 things I want to show you, so these are the parameters. I want to find talks about a particular topic, so that's my parameter here. And here I'm using a webhook. So this is how I tell API to ping somewhere else to fetch the data. And in the fulfillment section here, this is where you can define the URL where the calls will be made. So usually, normally, when I use Cloud Functions, so here I have a few functions. My function here, which is the one I'm using, there's a trigger tab where I can find the URL. So usually, that's the one I would have had here. But here, I'm using ngrok. And ngrok, and I'm going to do that live. Let's see that in the terminal. I'm going to kill it. So when I develop my function, and I'm going to show you the code in a moment, I have the emulator available here. So I've already started the emulator, but usually you start the emulator with doing function start, and then functions deploy agent2. Well, it's already deployed, but I'm doing it again just for the sake of this demo. Functions deploy agent2, and I'm using the HTTP trigger, and this is how I deploy, sorry, the first time my function. So it's available, and look at the accessible URL. Of course, it's on localhost, on port 8010. That's going to be important because we are going to use that information for running ngrok. And this is the local relative path relative to the domain. And here, I'm going to launch ngrok to say, OK, it's an HTTP call on port 8010. The ngrok service is giving me a web accessible URL here. And this is the one I'm going to copy and paste in my fulfillment webhook. And I save that, OK? And ngrok is running here. But there's also, if you look at this there's a web interface. And well, I'm going to clear that. There's a web interface which allows you to see all the calls that came in. So you can inspect the request, the response. So when I go back here and I do, so I want to hear about App Engine talks, for example. It's going to call here. You can see from the command line that there was a call that was made. And from the interface, you can also see the request here and the response that my function replied. And then let me show you the code, all right? So this is JavaScript, Node.js. I'm using two Node modules. There's this one, Node Fetch, is because I want to interact with a web API, the one on the next conference website. And this one is more interesting. This is the Actions on Google Node module. So although you can just consume and produce JSON, there are several cloud SDKs, Actions SDKs, which are available for different languages, different platforms. So here I'm using the Node.js version. I define some constants for my different intents. And I'm going to go directly to the end. And here, I'm exporting a function. Here, that's agent2. That's the second version of my function, which takes a request and a response. So I'm initializing the API AI assistant module. Then I'm doing the mapping between the actions that you saw here. The actions which were named, so find by topic. You remember me saying something about action here, find by topic. This is the constant. So this is this one, find by topic. And it maps to a local function, JavaScript functions that I have. So for example, the one I'm interested in, this one, find by topic. So I can get the argument, because my function, my intent here takes a topic as argument. Then I'm doing some string magic to make it work well. Because like when you have, what was the problem? I remember having something with Android and the, let's say the real end connector, which was a little bit weird. So what I'm doing, so if there's no topic that was passed, OK, sorry, I'm going to reply, sorry, I don't know about that topic. Could you tell me more about that? Otherwise, it's fine. I can fetch the content of the REST API here. So I'm calling the sessions endpoint. And then with that, I'm parsing the JSON. And then I'm looking through all the existing sessions to see which sessions actually correspond to the topic I'm interested in. So if there's no session found on that topic, sorry, I couldn't find any session. Is there another topic you're interested in? And otherwise, what I'm going to do, I'm going to set the context. Look at this. So this is the context that Brad explained earlier. We found some sessions, so we're going to look at the first one. But I'm going to add inside the context the IDs of all the sessions on that topic. because I want to be able to iterate over the various sessions which are available, so that I'm able to fetch one after another. And then, OK, the next session about the topic is called blah, blah, blah. Would you like to hear more, or do you want to move to the next session? So either you hear more, you want the detail, the room, etc., or you want to hear more. And so let's see that in action. So you already saw the first call, but when I do, so let's say tell me more about Chrome again. So here, this is the full thing, the time, the room number, the building, and then the abstract with the details, right? But did you notice something, Brad, here?
Oh, yes, thank you. I noticed that time, you know, we're in America now, like we don't do this 24-hour clock.
OK, OK. So I'm French, and I usually write the time 13, 20, or actually the military.
Military, yeah.
No. Yeah, all right. Let me see what I can do for you.
Americanize it for us.
Yes. So this is the find by topic more intent. That's the one which gives more details. But as you can see, the time I just blindly took the start hour, start minute, and I just appended the two. But I can be a little bit more clever. So I'm gonna comment this one and use this one instead. So if the start hour, so I'm doing a modulo 12 start minute, and then if the actual hour was before 12, that's AM. After 12, 12 included, that's PM. All right. So I did my change. I'm saving the changes. I did the changes live. OK, and when I go back here and I call more again, it's going to write 1:20 p.m. So I didn't have to redeploy again, or I don't know, recompile or whatever, redeploy and lose like the 30 seconds that I was mentioning before. All right, and then yeah. So something I wanted to mention as well is you can also tail. Oh, I forgot to launch it. You can tail the logs locally, so you can see the logs as the requests come in. But when it's deployed live, that's this icon. When it's deployed live, I can also see in Cloud Functions, of course. You can also see the logs thanks to Stackdriver logging. All right, let's move back to the slides, please. So you had the various modules that you needed, local JavaScript functions, and then you export the actual function, use the assistant toolkit or SDK, and there are many more available in different languages, JavaScript, Go, Ruby, and Python, and I don't remember the other ones. So that's basically the structure. So it's pretty straightforward kind of JavaScript. So you should be really at ease, and it should be fairly easy to develop assistant using Cloud Functions. All right, yeah, something we can also show, it's ultimately you want to use the real device, obviously, but we also have a web simulator for actions on Google. So I'm going to show that. Let's go back to the second demo laptop. So, oh yeah, I have to, so let me close that. So you'll come back to that as well in the integration part about the deployment. But you can integrate your assistant with different things like Facebook Messenger, etc. But there's also an integration with the assistant and Google Home. So here, you're gonna go into details into that. So I'm just going to launch the simulator here. So authentication, and then there's a preview button. And when I use the preview button, it's gonna let me launch the simulator. Again, I need to click Start. There's one more authentication going on. And then I can do talk to Cloud Next 17.
Sorry, this action is not available in simulation.
Sometimes I think it takes some seconds.
I have to do talk is good.
Oh, talk, yeah, sorry. Talk to Cloud Next 17.
Sure, here's Cloud Next 17.
And then we can do
Hi, I'll be your guide to Google Cloud Next, coming up March 8th through the 10th in San Francisco. I can help you explore topics or pick a session to attend. What would you like to know?
And then the usual flow as we so can continue. But you'll do the real demo on the real device later on. Yeah, back to the slide. Oh, yeah, and something I wanted to mention before coming back to the slide, it's that you might notice that the request and response, the JSON, is not exactly the same as API AI. That's the one from the assistant. And then the formats are not necessarily the same, but it's also interesting to debug and see what's going on as well. All right, back to the slides. So I guess it's time to deploy. So when you deploy locally, it's really just function, deploy agent, and then the trigger HTTP flag. And when you deploy on the real cloud function, you do gcloud beta functions, deploy agent, trigger HTTP. That's pretty much the same thing with the gcloud SDK. The sole thing that's different is the stage bucket, because you'll need a cloud storage bucket to actually deploy your code so that it's being actually deployed in cloud functions. But it's fairly easy, and also something, since we're using Node.js, you can, this line might seem a bit long to write, but you can also, in your package JSON file, you can also have some shortcuts so that you do node run, npm run deploy, and then it does all the magic behind the scenes. So yeah, we deployed the cloud functions, and then I'll give that.
Okay, so that was the server deployment. Now, let's bring it back to actions on Google. How do you deploy it so that it's available on everybody's Google Home, wherever the assistant is? So there's a web-based portal where you go and put in basic triggering information, and it's just part of the same Cloud Console, Developer Console that you've been using. And you list basic merchandising information, icons, description, sample invocations. And then there's an approval process. There's a set of both automatic and manual checks that get run. So right now, for your very first iteration, we're looking at about a 1-week turnaround, just so you can plan on that for some of the manual checks that get done. But then subsequently, it's much quicker than that for updates to go live. And now to speak a little bit about discovery within the assistant, how do people find out about your action? One is in the Google Home app. The directory listing is there, so you can see users can browse through and find things. And then there's also both guaranteed invocations and discovery pattern. So we think of guaranteed invocation is much like your URL. You have a URL to your website. It's guaranteed. If people type in the URL, it goes to your website. So that's true of the guaranteed invocations. There's a set of phrases, for example, talk to, and then your invocation name will guarantee users get to you. And then there's discovery patterns, and that's other triggers that you can register for, and other people can register for them too. And so then there's a ranking problem, which Google's pretty good at figuring out about who is going to win that query for that user at that time based on a whole host of signals. So you can register for those, and they could be reasonably broad, and we'll still let you have those and occasionally trigger for them. Okay, let's take a look at a demo. So back to demo 1. So here we are in the API Manager, part of the Google Cloud Console. You've just searched for the Google Actions API. You get here. You give it what we call a display name. That's what shows up in the directory. But then notice you also have to give it an invocation name. So here we're calling it Google Cloud Next. And notice I spelled out 20 2017, because there's a variety of ways you might want your name read. Is it 2017, 2017? Like, there's a lot of different ways to say that. And so by you spelling it out that way, it makes it clear to us how you want it said. And then other basic information. Then what you do is you go back to API AI and into integrations. And as Guillaume mentioned, we have a whole host of integrations, but the best one is Actions on Google. Of course it is. And then now Guillaume showed you the preview button. I'll show you the deploy, but just to highlight, here's that project ID. So that's the connection between what you put in the console, all that merchandising information with this project. And you'll just click deploy here. And we'll just confirm that. And I believe I have one under review, so that won't work. But then you can go, it'll submit it for review. And you can see, I've done this a few times, and even I occasionally don't get it past the review. But you do get some detailed explanation as to kind of why it didn't pass the review. And I put another one in for review, so they're looking at it right now. But this gives you a sense for where your action is. So we now have our action deployed. So let's take a look and actually try it on the real Go Home. Which is very risky to do in a large audience with the speakers and whatnot. So we're going to do the best we can, and then we have a video.
And perhaps we could also, could you switch to the demo machine, the second one? Because I can also, since I let the local development, instead of putting the right function which is deployed in cloud function, you'll see the actual request coming in.
OK. Let's just try a basic thing. Actually, this is the most common query done. Hey, Google, what time is it?
The time is 6:11 p.m.
Right, so that it's an expensive clock. Hey, Google, talk to Cloud Next 17.
Sure, here's Cloud Next 17.
Hi, I'll be your guide to Google Cloud Next, coming up March 8th through the 10th in San Francisco. I can help you explore topics or pick a session to attend. What would you like to know?
I need to learn about big data.
The next session about big data and machine learning is called Introduction to Big Data, Tools that Deliver Deep Insights. Would you like to hear more about it or hear about the next session?
Next session.
Sure, the next session is optimizing the value of data processing. Would you like to hear more about it or about the next session?
Next.
Sure, the next session is infuse your business with machine learning. Would you like to hear more about it or about the next session?
Ooh, more about that one, please.
Sure, here is more information. The presentation starts at 3:10 p.m. in room 2002 at Moscone Center West. The abstract says, with machine learning, instead of programming a computer, you teach a computer to learn something and it does what you direct it to do. In this discussion, we'll share an overview of machine learning and how your business can benefit from it. We'll cover the spectrum of ways Google uses machine learning and how businesses can leverage the technology that we've open sourced.
It's a long abstract.
You'll also learn how you can embed machine learning in your applications today and create new applications powered with machine learning. Would you like to hear about the next session?
No, I'm done, thanks.
Goodbye, and have a good time at GCP Next.
OK, so that's our action live.
Thank you. Back to the slides.
Yeah, can we switch back to the slides, please? OK, we don't have to show the video. Amazing. OK, so
had a backup plan.
hopefully the key takeaways you have from this is that you can and should even extend the assistant with your own custom action. I hope you have like 100 ideas in your head right now of things that you could go build, and I look forward to seeing you in the review process. Hopefully you understand now that API.ai can make talking with humans approachable and something that you can actually go accomplish. And that the cloud platform here offers a really powerful way to do your business logic. And just some other resources. There's a few other talks that are in this general domain. If you're more interested in kind of the bot side, especially bots in enterprise space, there was a talk you've already missed on that one, but you can watch it on the stream later. If you want to know more about API to AI, including other scenarios outside of the assistant and how it can be used for, say, Facebook or embedded in websites and apps, there was another talk that you also missed on that, but that's also available online later.
We were the last ones.
And then, of course, ours. And I saw some people taking pictures of the UX design resources. We've actually put a good set of white papers up, a whole checklist, a bunch of resources, because we really think this is the key to having really high-quality user experiences wherever you're building your conversational interfaces. So please take advantage of that. And with that, we've got time for a couple of questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.